Okay, it seems we are live. I'm going to try and join as well. It'll be a miracle, actually, if this works really easy, because it has been interesting. It's okay, I'm just checking now if we are live. Oh, actually, it says event will start soon.
But like in 1 minute, so.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out. Yeah, okay. What is it? If your event still shows live after the broadcast ends. Okay. We'll see. Do you have your event? Oh, we're here. Okay. Okay, I'm just closing that LinkedIn window because it seems we are live now. And thank you so much for being here to join me today, Aga. And for anyone who's joining us or who's catching up on the video later, today I'm speaking to Aga, who is an amazing neurodivergent coach, as well. She does a lot of work around the workplace, supporting high functioning, high achieving, twice exceptional women and leaders. And Aga also came to my last cohort for the ADHD Advanced Practitioner Training. And today we will talk both about the neurodivergent women and high achieving persona at work, as well as perhaps what she's learned from the training as well. So thank you so much, Aga. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you for having me. Hi everyone, my name is Aga Gajownik. As Sam mentioned, I'm a certified ADHD practitioner. I'm a business coach. I've been coaching people for the past 15 years. I'm a host of Innotainment Podcast and a founder of Innovation Integration, which is the company that I've been running for 15 years as well. Currently, I help neurodivergent founders, leaders, and professionals build profitable businesses with accent on profitable and brain-friendly teams and workplaces where people thrive, diagnosed or not, because I really believe that if you have brain-friendly organization, you don't really need to disclose your diagnosis to get like the special treatment, but everyone just like feels good within that environment that they want to keep coming to work, they feel engaged, and that's what we are aiming for in my work.
Thank you, Aga. This is such amazing work you're doing. I remember we connected on LinkedIn when I came across your work, and you were co-founding another business with somebody who I was following. And then
I actually remember that you reached out to me when we were running Agile Business Consortium campaign on Generation Agile, and we were running ADHD workshop, which was one of my first workshops about ADHD and how Trello and Scrum can help you with ADHD. Unfortunately, at the time you reached out to me, but I was 40 weeks pregnant, and I popped within a week, so it took some time for me to get back to you and actually do some work together.
Exactly. Well, I'm really glad that we're still connected. Few years down the line, and your child is now 3 years old. How time flies, right? So yeah, I would really love to talk to you about like perhaps what you see in the workplace. Because your work is very much about supporting people to understand what productivity truly means in a way that they're not just functioning but also thriving. Based on their authentic kind of values, and I guess I would bringing in the nervous system bit as well and the science behind it. But yeah, what have you seen then with supporting high performing leaders?
So in my work, I see a lot of people who are twice exceptional. So people who, let's say, like, have high IQ, they're gifted in one way or another, and then they struggle with some of the challenges that come with neurodivergence. So mostly within my area of expertise would be autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, as those are the most common ones that I came across so far. And I see lots of women who kind of like mastered survival, and on the outside they see really put together and successful, but on the inside they're falling apart. And what I also noticed, like there is this space where like there is a certain level where we're able to get to the point of like being high achiever, and then at some point we just like something happens or there's too much on our plate, and then it starts getting overwhelming, or we get stuck on a certain level and it's just impossible to push through. So I actually work with people to help them identify, like, are you actually working in alignment with who you are and how you want your life to look like? Are you creating that, I call it professional universe around yourself, so you're the sun, you're in the middle of that universe? Or you just continuously try to look for the drawers you fit in. As what I noticed, especially with neurodivergent people, neurodivergent founders and professionals, is like when you keep trying to find the drawer you fit in, like at some point you run out of drawers, and then you're like, oh no, I don't fit anywhere. And you have a choice. You either feel like bad about yourself and you're going to like the darker side of the development and you need a little bit more intense help, or you decide, okay, no, I don't really care. There is no drawer for me. Let me create my own chest of drawers, and then you decide on what you really want, how you can work in alignment with your values. Initially, I always worked on like values and objectives, but now also like in your cycles, in alignment with your nervous system, and make sure that like you actually don't burn out, because the very speedy brains, they come with a lot of activities that we kind of like put on our plates, and then when we so fast, we don't even realize when we crash, and until our body says like, okay, no, that's it, now you're not able to get out of bed for, let's say, like a month. And in my work, I try to get people to avoid that. So we work a lot around making sure that we make decisions based on data, and you have enough proof that you're doing great work, so you're not affected by rejection sensitivity, or you know that you're doing something and you're progressing, because the standards that we put on ourselves are so high that very often, even though if we perform in like top 10%, we keep noticing the negatives. And so it's like, oh yeah, but like if I actually focused and if I worked in regular intervals, like my colleagues who are neurotypical, I could have achieved so much more than just like crushing this project an hour before it's due, It's like, maybe, but we have to work with things that we have access to rather than with like wannabe situation that we build and we try to live up to those expectations, and then we just never do that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with like everything you said, because you talked about the high achievers that you meet and support. They often also have neurodivergent traits, and how actually just living with a very high achieving, high intensity and need a lot of stimulation type of brain is really a recipe for overdoing things, because you are either, very understimulated, or then like, I find stimulation and I actually just can't stop right now because I know this is like really charging me. And in the autism, there is a theory called the intense world theory. And when we were looking at high achieving neurodivergence, like many of them have been able to hide, like mask the burnout and the crash. But it's because so many of us also, as autistic ADHDers, we are able to appear like everything's okay on the surface. And that's not fully masking either. I realize that's just a level of internal containment, and just getting on with things. And also we've been, programmed from a very young age with the gender role as women and girls, to just get on with things, go with the flow, don't make trouble, right?
There's no crisis right now. It's like, oh, let me just like crash the moment when I sort out all of this crisis, and then once everything, usually actually what I see, lots of my clients, they get sick when they go on holiday.
Yes.
So they work, push, and then the moment when they realize that they have zero energy, they're not even able to like lift the spoon to their mouth to eat their breakfast, which is actually really scary when you look at this. And then sooner you realize that by following your brain is great, but by following your brain on just such high intensity without breaks, because we feel guilty about taking time off. We feel guilty about just saying no to certain projects, because it's like, oh, they kind of like have expectations towards me, and I have the expectations, and my expectations are usually double the expectations of the other people's expectations. So I just have to keep going and not stop until my body just says, absolutely, it's not happening. So we see lots of autoimmune disease, like hormones all all over the place, and women really struggling because that's the space where they just didn't really listen to their body. 3-year-old. I have a 3-year-old girl, and she's spectacular. She's hilarious. She is so much work. But one of the main things that I'm trying to teach her is to listen to your body. You know, it's like, listen to your body when you're full. Do you want to eat? Do you want to hug? How do you want to say hello to people? I feel like having that independence, and rather than being forced, like, oh, auntie wants a hug, let me give you a hug. It's like, let's just not do this to those young girls, and let's not try to put them into a, she always listens, she does this, she does this, she does that, because that language, so like our parents' language, becomes our internal language. And then, like, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it is because I work with adult women. I work with adult women between the age of 25 and 30, where they realize, yes, I've been trying to fit in, I can't fit in. But the main thing that we have to work on is their internal language, how they talk to themselves, and how we can make it softer, how we can, give them the space to actually be themselves, to relax, to align with kind of who they are. So they're relearning what is pretty much like fully mature.
Essentially talking about, ensuring that from a very young age, your daughter has a voice and she has that, realization of her internal agency, because that is so important, because, having coached so many women, and I know having supported so many neurodivergent women who, like me, were diagnosed later in life and then find that they have masked so much that they have just gave because that's a default, right, to be useful and to be protected. I'm 44 now, and a few years ago when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I think one of the biggest reasons is because my hormones were going through a roller coaster, having entered perimenopause and also having given birth to my son, and who is now 6 years old. And so there was that inability to mask, with the hormones dropping.
Space. I managed my ADHD for the longest time. That's why I was quite late diagnosed. I only got diagnosed during pandemic because I couldn't go out, and my brain was like, and I have a hyperactive type, so I was just like, I really can't manage. But then when I actually gave birth, even at 10 years of building my own systems on how to work and thrive and develop, the moment when postpartum hit me, I was completely lost. Like, I was snapping at my husband, I was snapping at everyone around. I remember sharing with my mom groups that instead of postpartum lows, postpartum blues, I had postpartum rage, because emotional state was just so all over the place. I obviously, I had challenges with this based on my ADHD, but adding hormones on top of that, I was pretty much like a non-functioning human for 2 years. I was supposed to take 1 year off to stay with my daughter, but I was just not able to go back to work after 1 year. So I took another year where I took it easy, and I only took part-time gigs, and I didn't really open my practice fully. And only after those 2 years, I was like, okay, now I'm slowly back in shape. So actually, I see many women who do get a diagnosis either in those transitions, so let's say prenatal, postpartum, area of perimenopause, menopause, or when their children get the diagnosis, because then they start realizing, wait a minute, it's like, that's not how everyone functions. Isn't that like everyone has to strategies before they get from point A to point B? Like, oh no, for everyone else it's easy, but I'm my environment, because also we tend to create environment around us that consists of very similar people to us. So if you look at your environment, you usually get along with people who get you. So most of the time they're kind of neurodivergent too. So to you this is normal, but the moment when you're told it's kind of not, this is a wow moment. And what do? I see lots of people who have grief connected to late diagnosis, what if I knew earlier. I personally kind of went through that because I was assessed when I was a kid, because I used to faint. I used to faint from being so stressed, work my nervous system up so much when I was at school that before exams I would just like lose consciousness. And I ended up in a hospital for a month. And then like no one knew what was happening. And they did all the psychological tests on me. At the time, let's be honest, when I was 16, that was a very long time ago, no one really thought about ADHD in girls. And the only thing I found out at the time was that I have high IQ. Oh yeah, it's just a fact. Okay, but like now I know that that actually is linked to neurodivergence and to the intensity and to the way I process information. And with time, I realized that was actually connected to ADHD, because 10 years later, I took my report from my psychologist. I read it. I was like, this is ADHD written all over, But because I wasn't problematic at school, I had great grades. I was in top 10, 15% of students. I never got flagged as someone that needed to be assessed and needed to get answers from the neurodivergent perspective, because I wasn't running around annoying kid. I mean, I was probably annoying, but not to the point where the society had to deal with me. Society doesn't have to deal with you until you have problems at work or at school or anywhere else, and no one will really like support you if you're different or your brain works in a different way.
But also, Aga, like you're obviously really intelligent. You know, you were one of the top in the classes, and from the outside, it didn't look like you have any problem. And even when you fainted, your system just couldn't cope with it anymore.
I fainted for 7 years. I fainted for 7 years.
Oh, but you mean that?
Like literally for the period of 7 years between like the age of, let's say, 14, 15, going to high school, up until I was 20 something, until I started working with a person that helped me in working out some ways in dealing with my nervous system, basically in any, I don't know, like arguments with my boyfriend, stressful situations, anything like before exams, something that was overwhelming, I would just like my.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, and as we talked about in the program that you joined, the AuDHD program, right? There was a module in there about the root causes, that underlies our health and nervous system, and also neurodevelopmental wiring. Is one of it is a gene variant that's actually pretty common in the neurodiverse community, the ADHD. So many of that, so some people just retain the stress and the neurotransmitters, that they struggle to then discharge. So when your body is overproducing it, and by way of how you are functioning also, that your environment and your lifestyle and your habits are ensuring that cortisol keeps getting produced, but none of that efficient clearance, which eventually, will cause a problem to our nervous system. And at the age that I guess you and I are at now, our natural sex hormones, and I'm on HRT now, so thank God for that. But before that, like you were saying, after pregnancy, and then like the day-to-day, I guess, also can be really shocking for how we perform and function. And I used to joke, like I used to eat, it actually makes my heart beat slower now. I can feel it. Like when I'm stressed, I'm like, my body's telling me to slow down, because if I don't, I'll stop breathing, which I did last year when I had all the perfect storm of ADHD medication, hormones, and stress in my life. So I knew that was the start of doing things differently. And then, so yeah, I wanted the regulation, like how had perhaps being in my program helped you understand neurodivergent women more?
The reason why I joined your program was the scientific layer. So having the experience of coaching, of building businesses for, at the time, it was over almost 15 years, Divergent Founders. I started working with Neurodivergent Founders in 2015, and that was the time where I realized that I can build systems for people who are not really organized, so let's do that. But then I didn't really kind of like connect the dots, and then I felt again very, very big on like neurodivergent an approach to building things, I felt like I didn't know enough, because it doesn't matter that I had my own experience. It doesn't matter that I studied that for so many years. It doesn't matter. I built coaching programs that were built for people who are built differently. But like I still I can't doing this and this and that. But at the same time, I didn't really want to do the ADHD coaching certification, because ADHD coaching wouldn't really help me, as I had the experience of coaching for so many years. Your program, I remember when we were talking about the whole scientific lens, like I'm a massive nerd. Like every single time when I want to introduce anything to my work, I will not go and read someone's book about opinions about something. I will go to so this is where I actually kind of picked up your course, and it did not disappoint, because the connection that I felt intuitively that I could make between different things, you gave me names for all of the things. You gave me names for like everything connected to hormones, for the intersectional parts. So also like the background. I never really looked through at this from the side of let's say like cultural elements. So like I always did like the cultural leadership, which had elements of that, but I didn't really dive deep into that space. So I found this one really, really useful. And then when I started taking it back to my work, I started connecting many more dots. And even though not all of the people who work with me have ADHD or have autism, or like they do have ADHD, but all of them have different brains, and very often they might never ever get diagnosed in their life. But when brain is supposed to work on, and this is like yet another drawer you should fit in or not. And let's be honest, when it comes to diagnosis of women, like we operate in freaking drawers from like medical professionals. Like I got misdiagnosed because I was too highly functioning, it's like that's not the story for now, but there is a lot of that. And when we start moving away from those labels, and then we start thinking about, okay, what do I need as a person with my brain to understand like how it's listening to us, how you can move. So are you still performing productivity instead of feeling productive? Because when you think about it, it's like we do perform and we have amazing results, and people see it's like, oh, you're so busy and it's so great, it's like you're such a big success, but inside you feel like absolutely not. Like I'm crying every day, I'm exhausted and so bad. So now if you were to ask yourself a question, that would be a completely different conversation. And it's the same when you start looking from the course perspective. It's like, okay, so I will look through my body. So I use the model called Basics, which that's why I feel like I loved your project, so the course so much, because Basics stands for body, autopilot, security, important people, consciousness, and surroundings. So in body, you look at your hormones and like how everything aligns. Like, am I sleeping enough? Am I eating the right things? Am I exercising? Since exercise is amazing for my brain. Then you have autopilot, where like how I can organize my work to like honor my nervous system. And I feel this is so important, because it will not be like the daily work where like, oh, 1 week where you're super busy and you're great, then the next week you might be less busy. So I know by Thursday I'm just like down. So I'll book most of my work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on Thursday I'll keep it empty, or I'll keep it for meetings with people. And this is where I know that like people will give me energy because I'm an extrovert as well.
Yeah.
My ADHD is giving me a lot of conversation with people. But then when I know that I don't have energy for that, I can then rely in how you work, then building relationships with people around you. So you start connecting with people who add to your bucket rather than take away from your bucket, and then being mindful about it. Because let's be honest, ADHD brains, how often do we stop and realize, oh, wait a minute, my heart is slowing down because I'm stressed. I need to slow down because I will not be able to breathe. That comes with time. That comes with mindfulness. That comes with listening to your own body. And then that comes surroundings. And that was linking very much to what you were saying in the course. It's like building an environment that will support all of those elements. Because when we're looking at holistic professional development, Holistic professional development is not about like crazy, concepts. No, you just need to look at your life as a whole, because you bring your work home and you bring your home to work. So having that and asking yourself the question, what
exactly.
I need is
And I love that you brought in the science. And actually, I want to validate this comment, which I often feel the same. Forgetting, Melanie has said that she's forgetting to carry out basic activities like eating. Often I wonder why I'm super hungry at 4 p.m. and then realize I haven't eaten all day. And I is a productive window, and I need to make use of that. And when we're in that zone of brilliance, the flow state, I find with autistic ADHDers, we struggle to get out and switch gears. Sometimes I have friends who have been on ADHD medication like I am, but my dose is quite low enough for me to still have some free will, but like I find like the minute you go like quite high dosage, like more than your nervous system actually truly needs.
I'm on those too. Like my GP actually asked, like, why is that? That's like 5-year-olds dose. But my body can't take any more. This one is like perfect. Like, give me the I just have to like depend on my own system. And I feel this is why it's so important. You have to think about medication. You have to think about food. You have to think about like building those systems so you can actually perform.
Exactly. And it's so important that we actually think about food, and I say that because the medication that I started on, and I think a lot of women get started on it, when they get diagnosed. But I heard the supplies is running lower now. But that one called lisdexamfetamine is actually also prescribed for people with eating disorders. So it actually reduces your appetite. So when you have that, then you don't feel like eating very much. And that happened to me for about 3 years, where I was actually just skipping lunch every day. And I noticed I'm doing that again, but like I'm also remembering I need to eat. But when you skip lunch every day, I think at some point I went from 55 kilograms to 46 kilograms, and I was stick thin, and I was on my way to developing something when I realized actually, I can't breathe, and then I had a health coach who supported me, and really all she had to do was turn the mirror back on me, because I knew what to do, but I don't do it. And I wrote this in a book as well. That is the challenge with us, neurodivergent women, is that we believe we are the support system, but we don't believe we deserve the support. And that has been the huge lesson for me, to then like turn the mirror around and see what do I need. And like you say,
if you were my friend, what would I do for you?
But we don't ask ourselves that, do we? Like
I also I work with this spectacular dietitian. It's like her first question was, okay, so what do you eat? And it's like, do you realize you don't actually eat enough? I was like, what do you mean? I feel like I eat all the time because I snack in the evening. It's like, yes, you snack in the evening because you don't eat enough calories during the day. I was like, so when you start looking at this is why I love working with data, because sometimes like we can't really trust our own perception of what we do and how we do this. But like if we start looking at data, so let's say, okay, so like, how much do you actually eat during the day? It's like, do you have enough protein? And it's like, okay, so this is this much. That's like a portion for 16-year-old, not like a postpartum breastfeeding woman. And I'm like, okay, I might need to like review that. So like having that information, concrete information, really helps. And that also, I feel like it takes me to the next element of what we were discussing. The moment when you ask yourself, what you need, and then you start like assessing environment around you. The moment you collect the data, the more data you have, the more plans you can build. And then like the block of things that the block before like doing them is like gets removed, because you don't feel so stressed about it, because it's not about like, oh, I came up with this idea, so I will start doing this idea and then people will judge me for it, so I'll feel horrible because they judge me and I'm like the worst person in the world. It's like, no, I research, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, let me test it so I can see if it's good for me or not. And the moment when you test it, you then can bring it in or remove it and decide like, yeah, no, that's not for me. But like the moment when we turn things into experiments, and that's also in professional development, obviously, like I build businesses, I've been building startups for years and years and years now. Lots of people are so terrified of taking the product and putting it out there for people to judge, because they automatically think like, oh, people will judge and I have to deliver this value. But the moment when we turn everything into experiments, so we apply this like innovation integration, so like introduce innovative behaviors into your life and then see what works, because it's all an experiment. We don't have to worry, there is no pressure, so like you don't have like the avoidance and all the other things that come with like very fast brains. Then you can decide, okay, that actually works for me, let me do this. And then on top of that, if you develop that agility of, okay, it worked, but today it doesn't work anymore. It's like something happened, let's say like 2 weeks ago in my life, and those strategies don't work anymore. Apply that approach again and again and again. You can continuously develop, and that becomes just like a holistic flow, which is a very good way to avoid overwhelm.
Thanks,
Right?
Aga. I love that. Actually, seeing things as an experiment and not taking it personally is actually super hard to do, especially for those of us with imposter syndrome and rumination and all sorts of things. But I have had to learn the hard way as well, because if you are going to be an innovator and you're going to create something new that perhaps hasn't existed before, and of course, the traction is going to be a bit slow to begin with, it's going to take time. And my entire work has been trying to figure out how to bring people on the journey. If I see something that really needs to happen, and like when you talk about data, like yesterday I gave a LinkedIn webinar that talked about our collective live experience research, that I use for the AuDHD training, but also neuroscience research and body research, and the thing about doing collective research is that then there's that shift from something's wrong with me to actually other people feel this too, and that's what the data had been able to validate, is that this is a collective truth. If other people are feeling like this, does that mean that the difference is in our neurotype, or is it also in the way that gender norms and rules have been put onto us? And you talked about drawers, trying to fit into drawers, but yeah, labels are a bit like that, and people.
I feel like it's more like my Polish is coming up.
What?
The drawers is I don't even know. I think it's just like a cultural reference, but yes, labels is exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and we all look different as well. Like there's such huge diversity that begins with the diversity in our genetic predispositions to then the culture that we live in. Like you're currently in Singapore, where you're based, and that culture is very different to what it's like here, right? And that's the kind of culture I kind of grew up with, because I'm from Malaysia, and having that achievement oriented. Like actually, I have been thinking about going to Singapore as in like to live for a few years, but then the thought of having to keep up with the rat race really put my nervous system to sleep. So I've been like, I'm just going to.
I feel like there is more and more shift towards kind of like trying to do something with it, because lots of especially when I approach workplaces, I've been talking a lot about trying to improve inclusivity and create those brain-friendly organizations. And initially, I always approached it from the perspective like, it's not about you adding another initiative on top of everything you do, because people are so overworked because it's so much. But let's look at improving efficiency in teams to promote inclusivity and avoid burnout, which is a completely upside down concept from everything that's been, let's say, it was all about creating initiatives. It was all about like well-being initiatives, where now I'm like, yes, but like even if you create fun days for your staff, but then you don't really help them in performing better, so they have less work, they're still going to be stressed. They will go to all of those team activities, treat them as something they have to go to, but they still think about like all of the things they have to do in the background. And I noticed that more and more people are looking at like, okay, how we can switch slightly so we can slowly engage people a little bit more, and then work with this burnout, because retention and the cost. So now like it's being translated from just let's say like a well-being and inclusivity conversation to adding a little bit of data to this, to performance conversation. And that I also see, I mean, like if you want to come to Singapore, like come and hang out with lots of expats here. So it's like we do go into like slightly different space. But when I was looking for schools for my daughter, like I saw that there are some schools that will go in this very, let's say like traditional Singaporean model. So it's like performance. Let's make sure that like children are fluent reading by the age of 5. I saw children reading fluently by the age of 5. I was like, why? And then, but then on the other hand, like you do have lots of play-based learning and like different initiatives. So people are slowly recognizing it, and they're seeing how they can potentially focus on, let's say, developing leadership in children, as Singapore has struggled a lot with having leaders. This is why there are so many expats here. There is constantly the development of leadership skills, the technical skills, because people, they really want to step up in order to balance the workforce, as just being told, just doing what you're told to do doesn't really work anymore. So that's slowly shifting, but I think there is still a long way to go.
Yeah, well, it's good news. It's good news, right? It is apparently one of the best places to live in the world, but it's also one of the most expensive. And it's actually the new blue zone, which is interesting. I wanted to actually, that there was Melanie comes up with really good comments. So she was like, I wish there was a happy medium between overwhelm due to executive dysfunction and overwhelm and exhaustion due to hyperfocus. I love this, Melanie. I showed a graphic yesterday where the ADHD nervous system kind of swings between hyperfocus and hypofocus. And we have a nervous system that is such a broad range, and we live in the extremes, and we are wired for intensity, pattern spotting, and emotional resonance. So I suppose what I'm saying is that there are things that will truly light us up, but like you almost have to adhere to the ADHD interests. What is something that you're so passionate about, and there's an urgency to it, but it's also something that you're emotionally invested in. And I find that so many of us are really driven by our emotions in the work that we do. And in some ways, that is also why it's harder to not take things personally if things don't, if our work don't work out. But yeah, there is, because of this nervous system, it has a propensity for actually just when you have difficulty lighting up, then, oh, what's wrong with me? And then when you do light up, then you forget to do normal life things.
What I noticed in regards to this particular comment, like I noticed that when you start working on your executive function, it's actually really powerful, because then you can start looking on how to manage your hyperfocus as well. As when you build your executive function strategy, so let's say you work around planning and prioritizing and kind of like working on your time blindness and different elements of strategizing. So let's say many of my clients, they will struggle with, let's say, like jumping in, not eating, and that. I'm like, okay, let's start working in sprints. Let's start doing, let's say, like 20 or 40-minute sprints where you have the alarm in the end. And then it's not about like kicking you out of focus, but it's more like, okay, so this alarm means that I need to use the toilet, drink a glass of water, and then let's say like have a snack. And then with that, the moment when you start developing that awareness and building systems, you can start managing the overwhelm that comes from both, actually. Because on one hand is the executive dysfunction, so being overwhelmed because there's too much, I don't really know what to do and how to organize it, because you kind of learn how to organize it and how to prioritize and build it. And then on the other hand is the hyperfocus, because you know how you need to continue living your life even when hyperfocus kicks in, because we hope it's just an hour or half an hour. Sometimes it's multiple weeks when you're in this hyperfocus. So I feel the moment when you start building strategies, taking both into account, you can really find this medium. But I would love to hear any other ideas anyone has.
I find that, I mean, I love your approach. In all the years that I have been coached and also coach other people who are autistic ADHD, and actually learning about the science and the nervous system, I realize actually that this nervous system really needs external accountability. And so also it needs to be in a way that encourages autonomy and agency. And so it was so important for me to have a coach who, I can talk to and can give me accountability, but and also to a degree give me agency, because some of the times when I find it hard to switch on, it's not just my how do I put it? It's not just my willingness, it is the fact that there are multiple factors at play, and we know about the biology, right? Where if I didn't sleep well the night before, whether it's due to, stress or hormones, then the next day I might just have to give myself grace, because forcing it is probably going to be part of the, the pain, and then
you might be able to force it for a day or two, but then in the end of the day, you will just get into even a worse state. So I like using metaphor of, when you start getting a cold. Very often, like, we kind of start getting a cold, we start getting sniffles, but it's like, oh yeah, no, it's not so bad. Let me just like carry on with my life. When I get a cold, the moment when I feel like anything tiny, I put myself in bed. And I'm like, I'm sick for the next 10 hours or whatever, like wherever the time it is. But like, I put myself in bed and I acknowledge my body that is getting sick. And then obviously like hot lemon tea and all of the strategy, whatever you use for strategies. The moment when you do that, you actually give your body the space to fight the infection. And there, like 9 out of 10 times, once I get up from those 10 hours or 24 hours, whatever it is, I'm normal, I'm good. But if I continue being like, oh yeah, no, it's not so bad, not so bad, not so bad, and I just like push it away, at some point my body will like, no, absolutely not, 40-degree fever, now deal with it. You're out for like the entire weekend. And I feel working a lot with founders, that's a very big thing when you look at people who are building their own thing and there is always something to do. Acknowledging the fact that there will be always something to do is first step to taking that break. Because the moment when it's like, oh yeah, I'll never complete my things on a to-do list. Let's be honest, we never do. But like we're taught somewhere along the way in our education system, that like if you have your to-do list, you have to complete it. But then we end up with like 10 to-do lists or like a very long one and it's never completed and we always feel bad about it. So we just like put more pressure on ourselves to do this. But then when you accept your to-do list will never ever end as a founder, especially. And then you say, okay, let me work in sprints where I just like decide on what I can do this week. But then when you plan that work, you don't plan it based on like what my super ambitious brain wants to do. It's more like, let me check my meetings. How much time do I actually have to plan it? Do I have 10 hours or do I have 2 hours? And then it's like, what can I do in 2 hours? And let's be honest, we're amazing at miscalculating on how long the things take us to do. So we end up just like, oh, I'll do this. It will take me 5 minutes or like 10 minutes, like 3 hours later, we're still doing this. So actually reviewing that work and seeing, okay, where did I go wrong? Like, so editing a website takes 3 hours, not 2 hours. Learning from that and then improving the process of estimating and building systems and like creating that to-do list is actually very powerful, because then what it gives you feeling of being in control. Because as you mentioned, you have no control over like not being able to sleep at night. It happens. You will not sleep at night and then you're dead the next day. Your hormones, like my toddler, like I never know when she decides to wake up at 4 a.m. and then like deal with life. But then knowing that you plan for, let's say, 80% of your week, not 150% of your week, you know that you have that 20% where you can give yourself a tiny break to recover and you're still in control. You're not just like things are not piling up. So I truly believe that the moment when you give yourself that space to plan better and to organize and to be realistic about how life works, then you are able to like adjust to your nervous system and really recover.
I was thinking actually quite a lot as you were speaking, is that like this year I really had to tune in like from moment to moment and ask myself, what do I need? And I'm not saying it in a way that, oh, I'm always like, what do I need today? Like it's very rarely like this, often it's
remember that, like set a timer, like ask yourself what you need today.
Often I only think about that when I know I'm on a verge of illness, or if I'm really, really stressed and I'm like, okay, you really need to do something here. And sometimes I know that the stress period needs to happen. Like I work in sprints. And so when that period is over, even if it's just for like a day, I know that night I need to recoup with sleep. I need to like maybe go for a massage or just sit in the jacuzzi. And the take home in this is that I want people to understand that actually some of the strategies that maybe you read about, like exercise, really good, but you have to also think about what you're going through. Like if you're already super stressed, like high intensity exercise, it may not be good for
Adding cortisol to your system is not
Yes,
going to help.
exactly. So it's to tune into what you need, because it's like people taking supplements. You know, I'm saying like, okay, maybe you take a B9 supplement, you take magnesium, and you take like, you know, all sorts, vitamin D. But then actually, the advice is that you take B9 in the morning, you know, the B complex, because it energizes you. You know, it's like knowing the time in your life and a time in your day where you do something, like you have a toolbox of strategies and know when to apply them. And that's what I mean by personalized, you know, management of our stress and like also autistic ADHD. Nicole here has said, like, that's why I help IT teams not to forget to eat and do little breaks. That's so important at work. And I love she said about trauma sensitive coaching and yoga. And I want to share something here because this trauma release exercises like yoga, Pilates, well, coaching as well. Interesting, trauma sensitive. But the trauma
being informed about that. Like I see lots of trauma informed coaching where you have to sometimes put your client in a space where, wait a minute, like my methods are not working here. I need to work out what's happening with that person, because you need to understand what they're going for, because again, like every single person will have such a completely different makeup of what's happening in their life. And I've worked with quite a few people, but not from coaching, mostly like I hear comments like, oh yeah, the coach was just asking me questions. Like I know answers to those questions. Like I know, you know, because you kind of like, you're really smart and you can work them out. But like when it comes to psychologists, like I often see that like if you go to a psychologist as a neurodivergent person and they don't really have the right set of skills or the right, let's say, like seniority and understanding different elements, and they kind of like try to force you into, let's say, you know, oh, let's work out your childhood trauma, or like let's try to like take all of this out and clean it up. It's like that person is not ready to clean it up. So what often happens, like they go, the therapy is just horrendous because they then come up with like all of this shit outside, and I'm like, okay, how about like we just like cover this like shit on the table with like a cloth and just ignore it a little bit. Let's build some tools around it and then like start working with this. So actually like being sensitive to like what people's experiences were, what they come in with and how they work, and applying it in coaching, in yoga, and then in many other things. Actually, I'm a prenatal and postpartum yoga teacher, and approaching prenatal yoga.
Else you do.
I'm hyperactive, have I mentioned that? So at some point I was like, oh, a pandemic, I can't do anything. Let me like certify in yoga.
Learn something.
And also I went to someone who is like science-based, so very similar profile to yours. She had like PhD in something else, and then she started doing like postpartum yoga. But like women going through birth is a huge trauma to body. Huge. And actually recognizing this as something that happened to me and something that changed me completely, because you will never be the same person before. And I'm not talking about, you know, your pelvis being crooked and other things which are more biological, but like even like your reality, now you have a human being you need to take care of. You have your brain that completely reformed. And I know I'll approach yoga class prenatal versus postpartum in a very, very different way. Because postpartum, you really have to reteach those women to listen to their body, especially if they had traumatic birth. Because very often when we look at trauma, we tend to withdraw because the emotions, we already feel too much as neurodivergent brains. We feel too much. It's so intense. It's especially like on the autistic traits. And then if you have this extra feel, sometimes our brain just switches off. So like I used to faint, like other people, they just withdraw. They don't have access to this. So like that's actually super, super important to identify and like how you can potentially support that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like there's so much in there that you said. I was like, oh, I want to say something. But
Isn't it amazing about like people who are neurodivergent and they try having conversations? Like, let me confirm that. Let me confirm.
Yeah. So yeah, that trauma layer. I love that. I I recently posted a video about my experience in therapy, and it's exactly like you say, it was all like too much and too extreme, because obviously I've done a really good job at like suppressing things, over the decades. And then all of a sudden they were like, let's open the Pandora box. And it was like, whoa, like it was nothing else. Like my nervous system couldn't cope. And 2 years later, I read about the difference in the neurodivergent women nervous system. Even just women's nervous system is different compared to men. At different parts of the month, our heart rate variability varies. So our resilience to stress will vary. And the time of your life, menopause, perimenopause, don't even say it's low. Like actually, yeah, we have like less resilience to stress. So doing the work
I feel this is why we really need to bring it into understanding from like the leadership perspective. So, like today we mentioned like coaching neurodivergent women to redefine leadership. When you start thinking about senior professionals in a workplace, and now you get the idea of like what they can potentially go through. So going through all of the hormonal changes, any of the trauma, and of the neurodivergences that might pop up later in life, actually understanding that and having this neuro-informed approach to working within your workforce. And again, I'm not talking about creating like special treatment environments that lead to toxicity and it just becomes weird and awkward. I'm talking about like trying to take people and just like educate the workforce around what's happening and how that can work, but also as an individual with ADHD or any type of neurodivergence, get to know yourself, answer what you need, but also like then once you know what you need, you integrated it, start communicating with people. Sometimes it's not about like, oh, I have ADHD, so I can't do this, or I have autism, so I can't do that. Like, I will not show up to this meeting. No, it's like you take responsibility for your work, but also like communicating with your team, communicating with your management, and communicating with your with like people you work with in general might actually really help in creating that space where everyone feels like they can work in a way that is most efficient to them. Because let's be honest, in teams, we want people to work well and we want people to perform well. And we kind of want people not to leave the job because we need them. But like in order to do that, like we really have to start that conversation of understanding. And sometimes even just a quick, hey, I'm actually going through some like challenging things right now, so I might be a little bit off. So like, can you please, like text me in case I miss your email? Or like another person, like I spoke to a leader this morning, and it's like, oh, I can just like respond to emails the moment when I remember, but then when I go to meetings, like my brain operates now or not now. So then it's not like I'm ignoring you and your request. It's more about, okay, if you want something from me, let's do this during our one-on-one. So we sit down, I do it here and there to make sure that like I sort it out for you, and then we continue a conversation. Sometimes those little informations that you can share with your team about the way your brain works or the way like it's most optimal to work for you is actually really powerful in order to be authentic and step into this authentic leadership, and then create that space for people to be able to develop as well.
Yeah, I agree. Everything that you said, actually, it's you're talking about, I guess, at the heart of it is self-awareness, knowing what you need to tune into it. But also what I've had to learn is, I'm still on my way there, is learning how to achieve mastery of your own emotions, and what you need will really contribute towards that. Because I suppose what I'm saying is that, if we are able to master our emotions, and then we can also then know what we need, and then create boundaries and advocate for ourselves. And I think that's usually where people will struggle, is they might want to advocate for themselves, but it comes out in a way that end up harming them. I think
very often, so what I see a lot is people who are overwhelmed. So if you keep going and you get to the point where you are crashing and you're in a survival mode, the moment when you start communicating when you're in that mode, that can come across really aggressive. And this is why I always tell people, it's like, pay attention to your own reality and see when you have to start communicating so you can do it in a calm manner. Again, bringing it back to, let's say, when you deal with your children, or when you deal with people who are like in the height of being stressed, it's like, that's not where you have conversations. No, the teaching, the learning comes when everyone is calm and collected, and it works. And it works exactly the same in communicating at work. So identifying is like, okay, what's very important for me to tell other people, how I can do this without, coming across as a crazy person. I'm sorry, but like many of my clients are actually worried, like, I can't do this. Like, they would just think I'm crazy. And also because there is quite a bias, especially when we talk about emotions, and the difference between kind of like how women and men handle things. So sometimes you do need this extra data and extra preparation to understand, like, okay, so I'm super organized, but like, this is what I need, this is what I need, this is what I need, and this is how it will impact my work and how we can improve the elements. So like speaking that language. So here we're talking about identifying like what language people are using, and then kind of like matching that initially, because with time we can slowly pull them into our language, into our reality, and they start like understanding and asking questions, and it's just much easier. But initially I would say, like, first things first, try to regulate yourself, and that can lead to co-regulation when you're in a leadership position, because then you can support your team when they are, it's like you move from control to co-regulation. You help your team, you help like building that environment where leading by nervous system, like by your example, you can then introduce that to others and really support them in how they work with each other and how they perform.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. There's a lot of insights in there, and I agree that it's almost like bringing the awareness back to what someone needs, and then and then what they're going through, and it's like tuning in, being mindful, but you are serving as a mirror to that person. And so I wanted to ask you, actually, so with my AuDHD program that you joined, if, like, say, someone who is a high achieving neurodivergent woman in the workplace, or a coach like you who's supporting them, like, how would doing it benefit them, in perhaps understanding themselves better and learning to support other people?
So from a perspective of, let's say, like a professional, I think what would be really useful when you take it is just like understanding how different brains work. Because you don't necessarily go into, oh, this is ADHD, this is autism, like there are lots of elements. And then what I really enjoyed doing was putting all of the information that I learned about, and then checking with my own brain as well. It's like, oh, is it like this? Like, yes, it might be like this, but then there are other things. So what it is? So then I would go into like a rabbit hole of like understanding my own brain. So I basically treated this as my own professional development, but like from like the personal development side, as I really don't like going to like any professionals. If I can work it out myself, I would like ask them to be flexible and like help them in like facilitating this process rather than giving me answers, because I can find answers for myself. So I liked that from that perspective. And from like a professional dealing with other professionals perspective, I really liked having the language that is based on like the latest research, because I don't really have time for that, to like research and make sure that like I give you the right data. Like you can't depend on ChatGPT or information from random places. I feel like that really helped in organizing my knowledge. And then now having that information, especially both of the layers, so you've got autism and ADHD in women, which is quite specific, that helped me in like developing offering around that space, because I know how to build businesses, I know how to work with founders, I know how to build systems. I'm really good at organizing the executive dysfunction coaching, but then like giving people a little bit of insight on how they can support themselves and why it makes sense from scientific perspective when they look at holistic professional development, it was actually really powerful. So I would say I'm really happy I took it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Aga. And also because our nervous system and the way we work, what productivity means for autistic ADHDers are also different, right, from neurotypical models. And
let's step away from perfectionists.
Yeah, move away from that. I don't know, like sometimes I still have my old coping strategies, but it's funny because like when we are aware of things, then we can try and talk ourselves out, into changing and developing healthier strategies. But yeah, certainly having a coach, someone who can remind me and can be my accountability partner has been really, really helpful. Thank you so much, Aga, for your time today. I look forward to talking to you again. And for anyone who's interested, I'll post the link for my next cohort, which is starting on the 4th of November. We start releasing the modules next week. And this is the first time that we're doing it as a hybrid model, because when Aga was here last time, it was all delivered live. I turned up every week, and then at the end, people were like, oh, I want to stay on, and you talked about a community. So I've created a community space as well, and I'll invite you back in, Aga. So
looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'll look forward to continue this conversation as well. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. See you later.
Bye.